Alright, so let's get started. Today we are going to talk about head shapes. Head shapes are very difficult, especially if so much relies on them and the fact that they frame the face and they sort of bring together all the features that you work on. So when you're drawing a face, like I said, I told you, simple eyeshadow, nose shadow, and then lip shadow, and you've got the basic structure of the features. But when you draw a head shape, things sort of get all over the place. And if you don't draw the right head shape, as you can see here, the whole face changes completely because it's like getting a painting, very pretty painting, and framing it in different ways. How are you going to frame this painting? Are you going to frame? It really just creates the negative and positive space in a painting. It sort of brings things together and gives things power. But with a face, it's a lot more complicated, but same concept. So essentially today what we'll be doing is focusing on essentially the head shape, the actual shape, the geometric shape that forms a head, and how it looks, and how it changes according to different kinds of heads. So you have model heads that have very large cheekbones, very pronounced chin, sunken in cheeks, wideish forehead, and slenderish nose. And these kinds of faces, these kinds of head shapes are very, very basic in art. They come and go. They're sort of the standard head shape. Very basic and easy to understand. But it's easy to understand if you're drawing it from front view. But when we're jumping onto the three-quarter view, which is what we've done in this semester, when you translate this to three-quarter view, and I've seen this in a couple of the things that I critiqued for you guys, that you guys don't know how to translate this cheekbone into a side view. And what happens is that you know how to paint, let's say you're having a three-quarter view, and then you have basic head shape there, and you want to translate this cheekbone on this side. What happens in three-quarter view is that you have one way of looking at a cheek and one way of looking at a cheek. You have two extremes going on in the three-quarter view. The first extreme of this translation here is a sort of, this is where the three-quarter happens. On the side that you see most, the side that's turned towards you. The way you shade it, it becomes very easy to learn how to shade this. All you have to do is know where to put the highlighter and know where to put. So put the highlights here, highlights here, highlights here, and here. And when you get to this side, however, this is where things get complicated, because how do you translate this gentle little bump in the cheek, as we see here, into a side view? You can't do that unless you understand the basic shape that's going on. So all things that we draw form not from a circle, as someone might have told you, but they form from a square. So let's go back to the basics of form. This is a two-dimensional object. This is two-dimensional. If you were to cut this object out of a paper, it would still necessarily be translated into two dimensions. The third dimension is barely visible. If the paper, however, was very thick, I know if it's a paper, it's three-dimensional no matter what. But let's assume that for the sake of this, let's assume that a flat paper is two-dimensional. When you cut out of a paper, it becomes two-dimensional. If the width, this part here, is wide enough, it becomes a three-dimensional object, because if you draw it, not only are you worried about this dimension and this dimension, but you're worried about this dimension, the dimension that gives it width, that gives it girth, that gives it fat. So that's essentially what I mean by three dimensions. In the three-quarter view, you're seeing all the three dimensions. You're seeing the front view, and you're seeing the side, and then you're seeing this length part. So you're seeing this measurement, and this measurement. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? So the fact that that everything is based out of this essential square, what happens when that square turns into a three-dimensional object? What do we get? Well, we get a sort of protrusion, something that defies the two dimensions and that it's working with. So we're drawing right now on a two-dimensional surface. This canvas and this pencil is two-dimensional. If I flipped my head to the side, I wouldn't be able to see a third part. I wouldn't be able to see anything if I flipped my head to the side. Like if I tilted my head to the side and looked at the monitor from the side, I'd just be seeing the monitor from the side like this and the thing on top of it like that. That's what I'd be seeing. I wouldn't be seeing this part of the canvas. It's always going to be flat because you're working on a flat surface. Okay? So let's just repeat that. Everything has a third dimension. When you're working in a two-dimensional subject, everything has a third dimension. In art, I mean, everything has a third dimension. This head here, the way you are supposed to paint it, you're supposed to paint it understanding that third dimension. The difference between anime and, let's say, Da Vinci's art is the fact that Da Vinci understands, welcomes, accepts, meditates on the third dimension versus anime where it doesn't. Even if it does so minimally. And even if it has a perfectly realistically painted body, for some reason anime likes to keep the faces flat. Anyways, that aside, this essential square here is the basis of all things that we paint. So this head shape right here has an essential square shape on it. It's not oval, even though it has oval tendencies. So let's translate this face into just basic shapes, basic geometric shapes. Okay, so you have the face, the front view. This can stay like this, and we can make it into this. And this front view here. We can make it now. When you want to create a three-dimensional subject on a three-quarter view, this is what you do. You draw the essential shape first. Draw the head first all the time. Don't go in and draw the eye first unless you have enough experience drawing the head. But essentially for homework today, what I need from you guys is a bunch of drawings of heads without features, because I've seen a lot of you hold weakness in that area. So this girl, basically, we see no portion of her neck, so no portion of her under part of her neck, meaning the under part of the chin. Just a silhouette of a head, you're saying? Just the head shape, just the head, not silhouette or anything, just the head. Even right now, you guys can practice doing that. So let's translate it. We see this part here. This part here, I've separated it with this kind of line. This part here is this part. Right here. Okay? And I know I've sort of made her face wide and the thing here flat. Let's just flatten that out. Okay, so this is her head from the side. This head, you can change it, morph it, do anything you want to it. But one thing you cannot change is this side here. This side will always be there. Even if you change this square, if it was plasticine or clay, even if you were to change it into this circle, this sphere, it would still have that side. Still have it. It will not lose that side. It will just be shaded differently. Why? Because the form changed. The surface area changed. But in art, you have to remember, if you want to be, renowned for the way you draw form and the way you draw shapes, you have to understand that everything has that third dimension. It doesn't matter what it changes into. Everything has that form. So essentially what I mean, it's the difference between a real bottle of water and a picture of a water bottle. Real water bottle, you can put your hands around it, you can hold it, you can tilt it, that has a volume, you can fill it up with water. However, in a picture you can't. Which is why that painting, this is not a pipe, if you guys remember that. Those sort of, those, I don't want to give them a title, Dadaist or Impressionist or all of that other stuff. But essentially, that's technically what it means. And it's not a real square. This square, no matter how many times I shade it perfectly, this square will remain the picture of a square. It will not be a real square. But a good artist knows how to make it look like a real square. Shades it to a point where it looks like it might as well just pop out of the paper. And that's essentially what it means when someone says, oh, that looks like it's just going to pop out of the paper. Okay, so what I mean when I say this side, no matter how many times you shade, or I mean shape, reshape, mold it, remove it, take from it, no matter how many times you take from it, this side will always be here. This side will always be consistent. But how do we find these sides? How do we find these forms? Well, light reveals everything to us, and light shines on things and reflects off surfaces. And as an artist, you have to memorize how these surfaces reflect off, how light reflects off these surfaces, and how form is formed through light on surface. So when I want to draw her cheekbone, but I still want to make it seem like there's this side here, this side that's moving away from us, and this side that's moving away from us because it's a three-dimensional object, I have to shade it in a way that's convincing. That I don't shade it like this because I don't know how to shade it. No, well, that's just going to go back to a 2D object. I want a 3D object on a 2D medium from you guys. So what I do is I shade it and try to preserve as much as possible of this side right here. This very, very important side. The side that sort of makes the difference between a good piece of work and a not so thorough painting. It's just blending. No, it's not blending. Blending, let me tell you what blending is. A lot of you throw around this word a lot. Blending is this. I'm just going to blend this color with this color. Blending is not contouring. Blending is not sculpting. Blending is just putting one color and finding the variation with another color and just blending. Blending is merging, forming. That's not how I want that word to be used. Blending is a technique that you can use. It's a painting technique. It's a very basic technique to find that third dimension, but it's not blending here just because you're blending. Or let me blend this gray, this soft gray with this light gray, and then a little bit with this. That's not how you make an object look 3D. That's how you blend shades together so that it doesn't look like she has a patch of white on her face. When I say sculpt, when I say form, I mean know when to blend and know when not to blend. When not to blend means when to allow an edge to exist. That edge, if I allow it to exist here, this edge right here, it will show a certain degree of form, a certain degree of shadow. And a good artist knows when to blend and when not to blend. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? Do you see how now it actually looks like a cheek compared to before where we were just blending the sides together? It doesn't. Why? Because we were just blending shades together, but now we are merging shades together to find form, to sculpt. And that is how you find that third dimension and preserve it. But essentially, the reason why this blending here looks successful and why it looks like a woman's cheekbone and into her eye socket is because I started off with this shape right here. This shape is very important. And I need all of you to understand and respect this shape. All head shapes, because we're focused on portraiture right now. We'll be doing other things like buildings and whatnot, and during then it'll be a lot easier. But right now we're representing a biological structure, which is a human face filled with skeleton and flesh and blood by a square shape. You can't leave it looking like a square, but essentially its essential shape is a square. Geometrically, if a computer wanted to approach the concept of a human face, the computer would have to create a 3D program. The 3D program Maya, 3ds Max, whatever you use. That 3D program has to start with some sort of shape. If you want the best looking face that you can mold and form, if you're a 3D programmer or if you're a 3D modeler, you're going to need a square, and that's essentially what you start with, a square. Okay? The same thing with art, same thing with painting. Every head shape, every hand, every nose, every form that you're going to start off with is going to be started through a basic shape. And that basic shape will help you form a very convincing looking human head that later when a commissioner asks, hello, can I please have a human head and I want it to have this kind of hair color, you're going to know how to do it. You're going to know because they're probably going to come up to you and say, oh, well, make this cartoon of mine into a realistic version, and they're going to give you $300 for it. Your knowledge of basic shapes is the difference between you being $300 richer and $300 poorer. I mean, $300 nothing, not having $300 period. So that's essentially what I mean. If you know this knowledge is wealth. This is wealth. This is going to come back and it's going to help you. You're going to be paid for your skills. And trust me, you will find someone who will pay you for your skills. And this basic understanding of shapes, and I'm going to spend all day today on it. This basic understanding of shapes is going to collect things together for you in your painting. You can draw the best kind of eye, but not knowing where to put that eye and how much shadow to cover that eye with. It's just going to make it look like you have a nice little diamond in a piece of shit, an actual piece of turd on the ground, and you have a diamond in it. Why not make the whole thing a sparkling diamond sculpture? And that's essentially what this class is going to be about today. Really, really try to focus as much as you possibly can on breaking down things into shapes before you start off. Breaking them down into shapes, again, will help produce the most convincing looking eye or nose or any kind of sculpture thing that you want to paint. And remember, you're not painters on a flat surface. There is no difference between you and a sculptor. A sculptor is a painter and a painter is a sculptor, and I really do believe that, because I think that we would have a lot easier time if we were sculpting. Why? Because we know what the shape is, we know what the measurements are. The earth and physics can take care of the shading. However, in actual drawing is harder than sculpting. Why? Because we have to create the shading. We have to memorize the actual physics involved in the shading in the outside world, in the real world, where 3D things actually exist, versus the 2D world of the canvas. And we have to memorize these rules and know how to shade and know how to preserve this 3D. In real life, when we sculpt, we have no idea what this 3D is. When we're sculpting and we get a piece of plasticine, when we're kids and we're sitting in a grade 2 class on the carpet and it's playtime and they're giving us a piece of plasticine and we're going to make a dog out of it. We don't know that we're working in the 3D right now. All we know is it's a tiny little piece of clay, and we're just going to move it around, give it feet, give it head, and give it ears. And that's basically what we're doing. But we don't know that there's a third dimension involved in this. As artists are working with a 2D surface, trying to create a 3D subject, you're going to have to know that this 3D quality has to be preserved. It's the same thing again with sculpting. Sculpting is an understanding of measurements. So in art, not only do we have to understand the measurements and keeping things proportionate when we want to paint a girl, but we have to understand the shading and the lighting and the texture and the form and the deepness of the eye socket versus the protrusion of the nose. All of that stuff is very, very important, and it all begins with the square. And if you want me to break down everything that I just said to you to something, I will break it down into this simple square with this shaded side here. If you remember, if you keep this on your desktop, this will constantly remind you, hello, when you're painting this arm, are you painting the arm as if it was just a flat surface? Let's say you painted a nice head and now you just want to add in an arm and a flower and a bird like I used to. This is too large. Okay, so let's say you're painting an arm. Some people paint an arm just like this. They put this in it and this, and they sort of shade the arm. And then this is like the top part of the arm, by the way, no elbow yet. Okay. It's hard to go back in the level, because if you're already at a level of painting an arm or painting an arm proportionately, it's hard to go back and paint it. unproportionately, but let's use an example. Some people can paint an arm like this, just simply coloring it in this way, giving it a couple of shades to represent that it's an arm. Not much understanding of skeletal structure, not much understanding of essential shape, but there are those who can paint an arm and make it convincing. How do they do that? So let's say this is the shoulder. They first choose a side of the square that essentially forms the arm that is the darkest. So remember the square. This square has a side that's always darkest than the other sides. Okay, this is the side that's the darkest for this square. Okay, so then I'm going to choose the side that's darkest. I didn't start off with shapes. Let's say that I made a mistake in my painting and now I'm trying to fix it. So now you have to find the darkest side and form from that. Try to make a really big circle. It's hard to make it round, like a perfect circle. That's the easiest thing to sculpt, easier than a cube, but like a really big one. Are you guys talking about sculpting prisms? I mean, spheres? Anyways, let's go back to this. So let's start painting this arm. This arm has a side that's the lightest. This part of the arm is the lightest. But it also has that reflective part here that reflects off the walls that I told you about. That allows us to believe that there is another light source on the side, and this part here will be on this part of the arm, on the darkest part, to help reveal the arm from the shadow behind it because of the reflective surfaces around. So this is basic shading for an arm. How about the skeletal structure? How about the elbow? How about, it looks like a piece of sausage that's been formed differently, weirdly. So here we go into the next part of the lesson. When you start off just freestyling it, let me just draw an arm here and a couple of fingers here. Okay, when you freestyle things like this, and you draw the hands like you go nuts, all right? When you do that, even though you know that there is a side that's darkest, you're not starting off with the square. You're starting off with a piece of sausage that you shade as if it was a square. And that's when you get into a world called, and it's very close to it, the uncanny valley. Meaning you make something look realistic that's not supposed to be realistic. Please don't try to make this look realistic, because it's going to look like a sausage. And that's the closest relationship we have to anything that looks like this. It's going to look like Harry Potter's hand when he lost the bone in his arms. In his arm, or it's going to look like a piece of sausage, basically. It's going to look like a bag of meat, and that's the closest relationship that our brain has when it sees something like this on a canvas. It's going to look like, what is that? I don't know what that is. So the way you make something look like as if it is an arm, you have to start off with the essential square shape. So this class isn't about arms, it's about heads, but let's just continue with the example because arms are a bit harder to draw. When we go back to heads, things are going to be a lot more simple. So let's say that we have a shoulder, and now we want to draw an arm. Okay, so we start with essential lines to know where to put the squares, and then we start off with the square structure of the arm. And then we have that, and then we have that. Okay, so just the arm, forget about hands, because that's a whole other world. And then we choose a light source. So let's say our light source is coming from here. So you have to put bone in it. Exactly. Thank you, Mattia. So this is where our light source is. So when I say use a square to form things, I'm not saying just follow the way it's shaded and just put a dark spot there. I'm saying, and please remember this, that there are essential skeletal shapes underneath that the square also represents. The square that I told you about over here, this square represents not only the fact that we know where to put this dark side, but we know how to put this dark side in there, what the edges are that we're working with. So let's shade now. Now that we have our light source, let's shade. There's always a square in an arm, and there's always a side that's darkest. All right, now comes in the blending thing that Michael was talking about. This blending thing is basically what you were talking about. This blending will allow us to make this look more like a squarish arm than a square, or like a dummy, or like an actual skeleton. So for those who are having difficult time painting skeletons, I think it's because you focus too much on the non-fleshy parts. And if you have paintings that look too skeletal, flesh that looks too skeletal, you're going to have a hard time forming anything that's, and you're having a hard time forming anything that's fleshy. You're going to have to remember to make it fleshy. So it's a balance that you have to understand that's really, really taught through this essential square structure. Okay, and that's a basic forearm, front part of the arm. And that's a pretty convincing arm if you know, for anything else. If it's not going to be painted professionally, I mean with time, a couple seconds on it and it already looks like an arm. Why? Because you put it in the right spot. You put the shading in the right spot. And you kept things edgy where they're supposed to be edgy. You've kept things smooth where they're supposed to be smooth. It no longer looks like a piece of sort of sausage flesh, but now it's starting to achieve some sort of frame. The frame, again, is what people have trouble with. Yeah, arm is too long. Yeah, I know, but I'm just trying to focus on the shading and how you guys can remember it. Okay. Same thing with the forearm. There's always a part in the forearm that's more edgy and that's more bony, and that's right near the wrist. So I know that. But there's a part in the forearm that's more fleshy, and that part I'm going to have to blend it to represent the flesh involved. Then bring in my light source color. And then edge things out a little bit. And then bring in that sort of edge lighting that comes from the side. And then you can just start forming the elbow and make it look less like a... It's my brush. My brush is horrible right now. I should probably use a bigger one. It's slanted. Okay. Okay, so this is the blending thing, but I have to make sure that I keep some edges, so I'm not going to blend here. I'm not going to blend there. It's very important to remember these things. Where did OC go? She's such a little sneak. I don't know where my kitten is, but it's okay. She's probably asleep. Okay, and then there's always a light part in that essential square structure. And then the reflective. Okay? And then, of course, things like the elbow have to be formed. Okay, so just I'm just trying to do things fast, but I'm sorry about the roughness. Okay, so that's essentially what I mean. This guy's got a pretty skinny arm. But that's essentially what I mean. Understanding that there is a side that's always darkest. It's not just blending like this. That's what people believe. If you just blend from darkest to lightest, you're going to have something that is 3D. I really believe that people think that, and I've seen it, and people really do believe that that's true. They don't blend as if things are real. They blend as if things are just flat, trying to be real, and that's something that you have to avoid. This is how you would paint this arm in this kind of light source if this arm had this kind of frame to it. That's basically what I'm trying to say with head shapes. Back to head shapes, you always have to know that there is a side that's darkest when considering where the light source comes from. But it's not just knowing where to put the shadows, but it's knowing that there is a skeletal structure. So it's not just putting the shadow here and then blending. It's knowing when to not blend. So it's not just blending like that. It's just going to look like a round object. Her forehead is going to look like it's swollen and it's just blended, like protruding like that to a point where we no longer see the line of her temple. So you see this line here, this edge. As I said before, how to translate edges together. This edge translates as a darkest part versus a light part. Not blending, knowing when not to blend. Fail all around, really. Yeah, people shade in a way where everything is rounded and there's no edges, and I used to do that a lot. And it's very, very important not to do that in your paintings. And a lot of people do that, especially when they draw foreheads. And foreheads are a big trouble spot for a lot of painters because they don't know that, they forget the basics. They're really good at blending. I mean, they can go to, you know, heaven and back with their blending skills. They're crazy. They have the best, they have the best brushes you can find. But the problem is that they don't know where to put those brushes and how to put them in the right spot. And this square here is going to tell you how. This square means, the reason why I haven't blended this square here to look like a sphere or whatever, prism, or I don't know what it's called, is because this square doesn't have this kind of edge. The kind of edge this square has ends abruptly, and then we have the shadow. This happens in faces as well. You just have to know which parts to blend because fat is there, easing the edge, and when not to blend when there's bone protruding, not easing the edge. Okay? And that's basically, this class covers a lot. It covers how to blend, it covers how to add in lighting and how to create shapes. But essentially today I really want you guys to focus, if you're doing homework for today, to focus on how to create head shapes convincingly. How to not just draw a blob surrounding the object that you're painting, but how to draw an actual skeletal structure that can hold all of the beautiful features that you've painted together, and how it can hold these features convincingly, not just plop them on, but sometimes they actually are embedded in the skull. And that's why I think in basic world out here, it's all we have the skeleton first, and then we have the muscles, and then we have the flesh. It's very important to remember that skeleton comes first. Same thing when painting. I kind of expect you all to be recursive thinkers, you know, professional. You already see the skeleton in your head, and all you have to do is just draw the flesh around it. No, some people, like us, normal people, need to draw the skeleton first. And that's why I think it's important for you guys to remember this essential square structure. So let's do one together. Now, let's do a 3/4 view head together. Front view is not a lot of hard work with front view. And 3/4 view is the hardest. So once you know how to do 3/4 view, you can do front view no problem. But you can also do upward view like this. No problem too. Why? Because you know which parts to shade and which parts not to. You know foreshadowing. You have your symmetry lines. And all you need to do now is draw things. All you need to do now is learn how to draw an eye from front view, from top view down, from worm's eye view, gosh. And know how to draw a nose from bottom and a mouth from worm's eye. But that's another lesson. Right now we're focused on just how to draw this essential part, because if you don't know how to draw this part, you can draw the most beautiful eyes, again with a diamond on the turd. You can draw the most beautiful eyes, but if the head shape is all wonky, then it's going to look like the weirdest little freak in the world. Okay, so let's go back. Let's do this together. Okay. So let's create the head of a woman, most popular thing to draw. Actually, any questions now? Sorry, I was drinking my tea. Any questions? Hey, Ellen. It's been so long. Did she leave? Oh no, she's still here. How are you? So any questions, anyone? Oh, there she is. A little ninja. Hiding under the mattress. I'm doing good. Any questions? Are we gonna have to draw now with you together? If you want, you can. I think it's better because I'm just there instead of watching it a rerun and then doing it with me. It's just better for your time and your practice. Okay? You don't have to have a tablet. You can have your sketchbook or anything, or just have your brain. If you have your brain here, I think you're good, and then you can just try it later when you have your tablet. Okay, so let's draw a head together. First things first, draw the square. Don't draw just a square like this. Don't draw just only the square. Draw a square. Out of that square, create that three-dimensional quality. Now, you don't need perspective lines. You don't need a vanishing point to know where to put these diagonal spots right here. Just eyeball it for now because it'll eventually all just get faded off into simple skeletons. Probably only going to need this part or this part or this part. Okay? And we'll go into it. So this is the basic square structure. However, when we do have a human's face is never this squared out. So we have to draw a square that's closest to the human face. So we have to think about first the surface area. The most important part is the surface area here. So we have to remember the measurements of the face. How wide is the forehead? How wide is the chin? Which parts do we have to shrink? Which parts do we have to keep? So essentially a human's face is long and thin, essentially speaking. Basics. Basic beauty basics, okay? All right. Now we have to think about the forehead and the head, the top of the head. So eyeballing, some sort of vanishing onto the third dimension. We have to draw a square that can fit in an ear, can fit in a jawline. I can go up into the temples, okay? If you know how to draw this, you know how to draw anything. So just believe me. On the value of the square here. And now we have a top of the head on which we will be having cranium. Alright, so now we have the essential square structure, knowing the things that we have to add on it. Knowing the things that we have to add on later. We know we are going to have to add on a pair of ears. We have to add in a jawline. We have to add in a nose and a mouth. So we have to think about these things. Now remember those symmetry lines that I told you about, how to put the eye, where to put the eye and the nose and the mouth. Okay. These lines exist on this surface here as well. And if you draw these lines early on, you will avoid any kind of, so you have to think about how much of the forehead you want. So the eyes should be somewhere here. And the mouth should be somewhere here. Ears will be somewhere here. Try to keep things sort of consistent. All right. Here's part 2. Part 3 is now knowing which parts, if you had a square, if they give you a square piece of clay or marble or plasticine. Now visualize this. Now you're going to have to start shaving off some parts. You're going to have to get your scalpel thing, whatever it's called, and middle of the cube. Well, they will be at the middle of the cube, but now we're just have to draw and make the cube ready. They don't have to be in the middle. They can't be in the middle because we have this entire expanse that's going to be the forehead and the skull. Get it? All right. So now we have to start shaving off some parts. So shaving off some parts means getting a knife and removing the parts that you don't need. So do we need this part? No. Do we need this part still? Yes, we do. We can't remove that part. So how do we keep ourselves from removing that part? We shade this part in. And shade this part in. Now, how do we actually remove them? Do we actually get a knife and go onto our screen and start scratching at our monitor? No, we start blending. But blending, knowing when not to blend, and knowing when to blend. And this is the part that we start shaving off directly into the forehead. Apply directly to the forehead. Sorry. Okay, then we shave off this part. this part, and we have some semblance of a skull going on from the top down. I like working from the top down and bottom up. I don't like working from the middle outward because having the frame is very, very important. Alright, and then keep shading in these areas. Then we start getting into the jawline. You can do this with your pencil. You don't have to have a big fat brush like me, and you don't have to start painting directly or start shading in directly. You can just have your pencil. Okay, now that we found the jawline, we can sort of punch an eye and put our thumb inside this and this plasticine and punch a hole in there for the eye sockets. Okay. And then find our light color. So let's go into that. We're still in grayscale at this point because it's pretty early on. I don't want to go into color just yet. And then we start having to create the illusion that we've added some plasticine for the cheekbones and for the nose. Okay, and now we have to find the forehead again. But remember, keep this side here dark. Keep it dark. Keep it respecting the third dimension. Now we have to start shaving off some of this here. So we have to shade a little bit here. And start shaving off some of this. And you're going to have a bunch of little shavings on the ground. Because you're sculpting, technically. Okay. Looks like that saw mask. Yeah, it does. Alright, so let's remove some of those lines. These lines helped us do what? Helped us know where to put these features and how to keep them symmetrical in shape. Alright, and then just keep going. Keep sculpting. Blend where you need to, and don't blend where you don't have to and where you shouldn't. Okay, find some sort of eyebrow structure. Okay, and then add in a bit of a brow lightness right here where the brow bone sticks out. So now we've created sculpted some sort of protrusion in the eyebrow, meaning that if you were to see this face from the side, and then this would be the eye here, we've just created this thing that if the eyebrow was here, the light would be shining like this, touching this area, and touching this area, but the shadow would be cast on this area and under the nose. Okay? So that's technically what I mean when I say the brow now is sticking out, because we've created the illusion by painting in a way that is three-dimensional on a 2D surface. We've created the illusion that something is protruding because we followed the laws of physics as they happen outside, meaning the laws of shadow, the laws of mass, and how much interrupts the light flow and how much shadow we get from the interruption. Okay? And now we can find the nose and create a shadow here. So the light is coming from the top, and so the shadow is going to be pushing off this way. Keep yourself zoomed out. Don't zoom in, for God's sake. You're going to lose all control over this. Basically, it's like flying an F-21. If you were flying an F-20 whatever, and F-22 whatever, and you were sticking your face right on the dashboard on the plane, would you be able to see anything? No, you'd have to move your head like freaking 10 degrees in order to see an oncoming ship or whatever, or a missile. But if you zoom out, you have more control because you see that thing before it comes. Same thing here, better vantage point over everything. Okay, now we have a nice forehead, but look at this. This part has remained. So now when we start adding in the cheekbones and adding in all these other areas, we have the frame already of the face. We already know how this face, what the size is going to be. We already know what it's going to look like. So because we found the shape, we found the area, and because the light is shining here, this part is not, the square was going to be light here, but it was not going to be that much light there, as you remember the square shape, as you remember it. Okay, so this part here is going to be a little bit darker. Now shrink your brush. Now you remember, keep your brush large as you start off. And remember how we shaved off this part? We're going to have to start shaving off. And finding the shape of the skull. Now, as you can see, it took us forever to get to this point, but I could have just painted in a basic shape of a head and painted in some eyes, and I'd be already on this level. So I spent like maybe just now 10 minutes on this, but someone can do 2 minutes and get to this level. But the difference between me and them is that I know how I got here, and they probably don't know how they got there. They just memorized how to get to this point. But we got to this point here together by knowing the essential importance of the square structure that underlies all shapes, including the shape of a head, including the shape of an arm, the shape of a finger. And if you remember this square structure, you will avoid drawing an unrealistic looking or wonky looking head shape or arm or square or nose or whatever. Okay? And now we have to start forming this part of the head. And this part here can be formed like this. Remembering that the light is shining here. Part of the ear is going to catch some light and part of it won't. Because remember the square structure involved. Now we have to remember the temple. The temple needs some sort of squareness to it because we haven't yet edged out the temple here. So the temple is going to have a bit of squareness to it. We need to fix this cheekbone. And know where to soften things through when they're covered in flesh, like the cheek, and know when not to. And now to create the edge that matches this edge. Just outlining things up. Finding the cheekbone. I know outlining shouldn't be done here, but let's do it for the class because I know some of you can't really make out what I'm doing. And then balance out some measurements, make things a bit more proportionate. And now we have the basic structure of a head. And this is while painting. This is a harder version than getting a pencil and sketching it out. Sketching it out is a lot easier. All you have to do is just do exactly what I just did with the lines. But now we have the shape of a head, and we know where to draw a neck from. We know where to create a neck. We know how to approach this portrait now. But for those who are having, this is specifically for those who are having trouble painting heads and drawing heads, you have to remember this essential dark spot right here. You have to remember it. It keeps things looking three-dimensional, but remember that the essential dark spot isn't just on the side of the head, it's on the side of the nose. So remember, now we have square on square. We have, that sounds weird, but now we have two squares on each other. The square of the nose versus the square of the original head shape, which is the head here. And now we imagine how things protrude. The lips protrude out. So remember, seeing this from the side view, we have the nose, we have the eyes. So this part is going to be illuminated. Check. This part's going to be illuminated, which is the cheekbones. Check, check. This part's going to be illuminated. Let's do that then. Okay, so check, and then the lips as they stick out. Okay, right here. Check. Just imagining things in a different perspective, in a different point of view, helps you draw things a lot better and a lot easier. Alright, now remember what I told you. The 5 or 6 dark spots in a face help you create a very efficient looking face. You have to keep at it, Mitya. Know how valuable your lines are. Your lines are very, very valuable to you. So would you throw them anywhere? You have to know where to put them exactly. Give them value, and that way you don't use them cheaply. Imagine that you're spending $100 for each line that you draw. Give that line its value. So the first dark spot, I always do the nose first, but that's my little quirk. You guys can do anything first you want, but I recommend doing the eyes. But it's just because I'm obsessed with doing the nose first. I used to be very afraid of doing noses, so if I did the nose, I wasn't afraid of anything else. So now I get the nose out of the way, sort of. Okay, so the dark spot of the nose. Let me keep this near me. And then the eyes. Okay, now that I have the eyes, now I know that there's a top lid. So the top lid, as we can see here, can get some light on it. Okay, so now we have a lid for either eye. But we can't put the light all around it like this. We have to put it only in the areas that the light touches. So the topmost part of the eyebrow, of the eyelid. So get our thing back and now try to find some sort of eyebrow. Make sure that you're not just drawing the eyebrow in like this and adding some lines because that's going to look very fake. You're going to have to work big brush all the way down to small brush and forming the eye slowly. The eyebrow slowly, giving it shading and then going in later when you're doing eyelashes and all those other tiny little details. That's when you're doing. And remember, there's a million mistakes in here that I haven't seen personally yet, that I'm going to have to flip this canvas horizontally soon in order to see these. But do you see how this face is working? Because this part, we've kept it edged out. This nose here, we haven't blended this into here until it looked like a piece of sausage on a piece of sausage. We know which parts not to blend, which parts to blend. And then finally the edges of the lips. I always like making the top lip darker. It's easier to translate that into a structure of a pair of lips. And then now we have lips. Now we have a lip that's on the bottom as well, right here, as you can see. This bottom part of the lip is going to get some light. Let me zoom out. I'm way too zoomed in. This is how I draw my specific, Photoshop's shitting itself. This is how I draw my basic face shapes. This is basically the style of the eyes that I draw, the style of the nose that I draw. But you guys have your own styles, but you know now how to get to that style and draw that. Yeah, I'll put this on YouTube. Oh, your kitty's ultra snuggly. Mine is ultra hideaway under the mattress. Do you see? Do you see what I have to put up with? I don't know why Photoshop's being a cow. Sometimes my RAM gets really loud and I can't do anything anymore. Does anyone know why that happens? It just gets really loud and it's like, Gah! And I'm like, calm down. Let me save. Don't let Photoshop use too much RAM. Yeah, Bear, me too. She snuggles around my feet when I have food. When I don't have food, she couldn't care less. If I were to burn in a fire. Okay, so now let's get back to this. Nose and then lips. Okay, and now we have basic structure. So you see these outlining things? I didn't just put these lines here. These lines are going to be shades later. And then I'm going to sculpt them through until I can get some sort of shape through them. The neck is also essentially a square shape, so I have to remember that. And now what I usually do is now I start giving things a bit more pizzazz, you can call it. Oh yeah, and don't forget the chin. I sort of go in and start adding in a bit more detail. So detail like before the eye was just a blob of black, now the eye is going to have a pupil. It's going to have a tear duct right here. It's going to have a bottom lid that's very, very pronounced bottom lid. It's going to have a top lid outline. And that's essentially what I do with my paintings. I sculpt them through. For me, because I've done the essential head shape thing so long, I don't need to do it anymore because my brain does it for me, and I already see it there because it's become what? It's become habit. So habit is what builds skill. And I don't believe in talent. I believe in skill. I believe in practice. So it's not that I'm talented or that I have an extra part of my brain that you guys don't have. No, it's that the skill has been built, and you guys have to build that skill in order to create that work that reflects that level of skill. So basically what I did was I didn't just draw eyes first. I drew a head shape first. I drew the shape, the frame first, and later when I draw the eye, when I draw the as crappy as this is, and I'm sorry, I'm not very proud of it, but later when I do draw the eye and everything else, things are framed well. Things are sort of coming together, and they sort of have a basic, let's say, frame for now until my brain decides to work. That's the fan trying to cool your processor. It creates a lot of heat when it works hard and will shut down if it gets too hot. Might need to clean the dust out of the computer case. I think you're right. She looks like she's about to be hit by a slow-mo bullet. Oh. Will you flip? Yes, I will flip now in a second. I just wanted to get the lips done. Thank you, SRD. So now when we flip, what happens? I'm going to find all the bajillion different mistakes. First mistake, and I get this a lot, this part always comes out too much. Second mistake, this edge is protruding too much. So what do? Simple. Now that my brain is working on the side that it likes, not on the side that it doesn't want to work on, now it's going to fix things the way it wants to see them. And eventually I'm going to start flipping through, and I'm not going to find any mistakes. Now that's because my brain likes what it sees at the skill level that it's in. Usually what it likes is not the right thing, not 100% the right thing, but it's at least at a level where it agrees with what it's painting. So I'm not going to go and paint this 100% perfect or anything. But now you guys know essentially how to create a basic head shape and how to preserve this side and how to keep these sides shaded here and here. So if you worked on this for another 5 hours, this is just a couple minutes, and I know it's crappy and I'm sorry. But this, if you were rendering this for 3 hours, you'd get a masterpiece, because what you have to do is you have to remember that the more you work on something, the more you render it, but you can't over-render things to that level. You can't over-render all of this. Sorry, 1 minute. Okay, sorry, my laptop overheated in November. Isn't the part at the left a bit too high up, the dark part? Probably. Let's look at it. So remember, always preserve, sorry, don't over-render too much. Always preserve what you're doing. So you mean this part, Mitsia? Always preserve these edges that you're painting. Never over-render and never lose them. And then try to find shadows again. Cheekbones, I don't like them. I draw them down. And head shape. But essentially this is what I'm talking about. Preserve as much as possible the shape that it's underlying all of your paintings. And make sure that the light that comes through representing the light source, not sort of having its own light source for the nose, own light source for the eyes, own light source for the Now all these things, I usually keep the side that I flipped. I usually keep that side because that side sort of it sort of challenges me instead of the usual side that I'm comfortable with, which is drawing that other side, from the left side 3/4 view. Okay, and then I usually just render hair, render some sort of thing, I don't know. Okay, so do you guys know what I mean with that essential square shape? Yeah, well, this is a 5-minute piece of things, so don't expect the best thing that I could come up with in a couple minutes. But more or less, oh, you said more or less too, Ellen. More or less, I need you guys to understand all of this, because when I see you guys do your 14-day challenges that we've talked about, when I see you guys do colors and go into these things, understanding the basic shape of a head, almost you guys feel like you're too good for that. And I do that too, for God's sake. It's not something rare. A lot of artists feel like they can just keep rushing through and they forget about the basics that underlie everything. So I constantly want to have this break between our lessons that reminds you, okay guys, listen, there's essential basic principles that we're drawing from, literally drawing from. We're drawing basic squares and circles and we're just shading them. So you have to remember, if you guys want to draw a nose in a specific kind of light source and you don't have that specific reference to work from, your brain can do it for you. Just give it a chance. Understand that they're shapes and understand that you have to sort of find the shadow in there. Find the shadow as the nose sticks out. Understand that there's all of that stuff going on that creates that kind of shadow, and try to emulate the real life physics on the outside world, on the world of 3D right now that you're in, versus the 2D world that you're trying to paint. And you're an artist, meaning you're trying to create the 3D world in a 2D subject. Remember that. Remember that there are circles and squares that you have to know. You have to break things down in order to create things over again. So you have to, the difference between us and God is that, if you guys believe in God, if you guys believe in nature, whatever it is, the difference between us and the creator or whatever, the big artist, the big man, is that he doesn't need to break things down and then draw them again. He just draws them. We need to break things down and then draw them again. The breaking down process, breaking things down into shapes, essentially means we are learning by making mistakes. We are learning by knowing how things come piece by piece. We can't take things full on right away. You're going to spend 5 years or 6 years trying to paint a face till you get it right if all you're using is references. But if you spend at least a month of your life understanding the shapes that undergo all paintings, you will quickly improve. You will improve very quickly. And that's basically what I'm trying to say. So break things down into shapes whenever you can. Thanks for coming, Michael. Break things down into shapes and then draw them back up again. And that's basically what you have to do as an artist. And how do you proceed when you have some hard lights going on? Hard lights, you mean like the very intense shadows spent? Do you mean like silhouettes? Do you mean like a light right beside the head? It's always best to work from reference. But reference sort of really keeps you close to your subject matter. But if you're not working from reference and you're working creatively and you want to just do things, you want to keep a certain degree of realism to it, imagine the shape, imagine how that shape, imagine the light source as a line, and imagine the shape standing in the way of that line. How would that shape create a shadow? A shadow is something that interrupts the light flow. So if you have a very intense light source, you're going to have a very intense shadow. And that you're going to have to know how that subject stops that shadow. So my newest piece, let me find it. I had a lot of trouble creating the shadow that was being cast by the light, because the light was going from the back, but it's also like atmospheric light that's coming from the side. So you see this shadow here. I had a lot of trouble with it because I'm like, well, how the hell am I supposed to create the shadow? Then I thought of the way that this this whole structure here could be creating that shadow. The light is not only coming from, so even though we're seeing bottoms up, even though we're seeing from a worm's eye view perspective, basically, or less than at least the medium point of view of this building or this structure here, the light is still above it. So this is why the light goes down like this. It's not going to go down like this because the sun is still essentially higher than this structure. And so I began to imagine the light as, you see these lines here? These kept me understanding how to put the shadow. So I imagined the light source as a line spent. And imagining how that, even though it could be wrong, and I'm sure it's wrong, it's just how my head sees it, and I'm sure it's wrong. But as far as it's for the painting, I think it's worked for the painting. A good artist once said, if you can create light, if you have lighting that works, that makes sense, even though it doesn't make sense at all, but it looks like it makes sense, that'll work, because you're working with your own world, you're creating your own laws. But essentially it has to make sense in the fact that objects stand in the way of light, casting shadows. So I had a lot of trouble with that. And the second that I imagined, I broke it down. I said, let me break this down. Let me see how I can do this. I broke it down and I said, there is a light source and there is a line coming through that light source, and this shape is standing in the way of this line. How will I create this shadow? Same thing in the other piece that I did. I had a lot of trouble. Let me find it. Because it's not, I'm teaching this to you, but I'm not professional at it. I wish I was, but I'm not. I think this one as well, I had a lot of trouble with it. I'm so used to drawing a face. When I go into landscape, I have to work on a larger scale. So in these trees and this light source behind it, I didn't want to create that sunset orange. I just wanted to keep that fantasy green. These shadows here, I was trying to give them some sort of respective shadow that will create some sort of realism. But I didn't want to create too much realism, because then it wouldn't be believable. It would just be like the movie. So when I thought of light, and I was having a lot of trouble, I thought of light as a line. Please remember, imagine light is a line, and the object is standing in the way of that line. So let's give this chick here, let's give her a nose and give her a shadow for the nose. Okay? So let's give her a nice little nose and give her a shadow. So we have a, sorry for the roughness, but just for the sake of time. Alright, let's give this basic nose. Alright, and then we have this here. Okay, now she's gonna have a nose. So let's create the nose. But how do we create the nose properly? How much of the other part of the face do we see? So we have the light coming in this way. Okay, so this light is a line. So let's draw a diagram. Line coming through, and then we have a triangle that looks like this. This triangle, part of it will be exposed to all the light. And imagine this is very hard light, so this is what you asked for. Hard light, and then not one part will be dark. So now we have the basic shading of the object down. So we have the shading down. It's basic and it's working. Alright, how about the shadow? So imagine it as a line. So there's a line over here. Let's get the red. There's a line coming out of this, and a line coming out of this, and then a line coming through to this spot. Imagine the red is the light. Now I have to draw a spot here that'll, even though it's not real, even though it's not the actual physics, so remember there's another part of the triangle over here, of the pyramid. Alright there, and then here, and then there. Okay? This is basically how I break it down and how I find a simple shadow for a triangle. So let me remove all the red stuff and find that shadow again by trying to, I didn't do another layer, I'm dumb, so that's why I have to remove the reds. And I sort of work with the edges of the object as if it's an actual line going through it. And remember this important rule: the more an object goes away from the light source, the more faded its shadow is. So this shadow will get faded the further away it moves. Remember to keep it flat on the surface there. Same thing with faces, same thing with mountains, same thing with everything. Imagine light as a line. And if you have hard light and you're going to have this shadow here, this shadow has to stop the light in a way that represents its form, represents its shape. And so we're going to have a little bit of a cheekbone here, a little bit, not that much. Because the light, as much as it's casting a shadow, the light is shining on the cheekbone, on the other cheekbone on the other side. And then we're going to have this part of the nose shaded. And we're going to have something that looks like that. And then the nostril here illuminated. Okay? Okay, so I mean, let me just read what you guys are saying. Hey, as to how would you draw a drop shadow of a box if the light is behind it? If the light is behind it, well, we're going to have a silhouette of the object. And then we're going to have, so let's create the light first, the environment first. And then we're going to have a square. You said cube, right? I don't know if you mean from the side or mean from the same essential idea. Let's just draw it head on. Same essential idea. You're going to have the shadow as if it's, as if you're on the darkest part of the object, on the darkest side, and the shadow is coming there. This light is going to create that much of a shadow because we're on the exact opposite side. So depending on how the light is formed, we don't know if the light is flooding. We don't know if the light is so intense that the shadow becomes pointed. We don't know if the light is, there's double lights, so then we have two shadows. But point being, this is what happens in eclipses. We have a complete darkness. Why? I used to ask this question. Why is it that when we have eclipses, the moon doesn't glow because the sun is right in front of the moon? So and then I realized that, hello, there is a shadow going on, and we're on the side of the shadow. And the shadow is going to cast off a silhouette. Is that what you meant? Is there some rules, like if I were to draw that box with perspective lines, how would I draw that shadow? There are no perspective lines or vanishing points for light sources. Exact shape of the shadow, exactly, that's what you're asking. There are no vanishing points for light sources. You can make it one vanishing point and work from that and work with the edges. You can go ahead and do that, but you can't figure out the exact scientific interruption of the light because you don't have the exact scientific mass of the object. In real life, think about it this way, light does that independently. That's the miracle of life. These laws of physics happen without us measuring them or not. So a big object, let's say a paper in front of a light source, is not going to cast that much of a shadow because its mass is less. Versus a teacup, it's going to cast a heavy shadow because the mass is high. Plus the weight and everything. So you have to wing it to a certain degree. Yes, Mattia. But let's say that you do have a light source and it's right there in the painting, which is the sunlight. Try to create, just like I did, vanishing points. They're not really vanishing points because I don't like that idea, because nothing is really vanishing to a certain point. Light is light and there's something interrupting it. Not all shadows are going to have vanishing points. For objects that are squared, it's easy to create vanishing points. What about a tree? What about a tree and its leaves? Are you going to have vanishing points for every single little hole in the tree? No, you're going to have to create some sort of eyeballing thing that's going on. But that's why I say always try to have a reference for extreme kinds of light sources, because extreme kinds of light sources have that difficulty factor removed, and then all you have to do is you know exactly where it's coming from. Not to mention light diffraction. Do we consider light as a particle or wave? You consider it as a wave, as a line. You consider it as a direct protrusion, let's say a direct flow that you're going to have to interrupt with a nose, you're going to have to interrupt it with a hand, you're going to have to interrupt it with a... Yes, it is also particles, but let's just remove that little microscopic scientific hypothesizing to the side. It's not hypothesis, it's fact, but let's just move it out to the side so that we can focus on a specific rule and keep it and trust it. You can trust that light has light waves, lines, rays of light that will be interrupted by an object. Okay, with a gradient refraction index. Space. You troll. Light is effectively a particle. In fact, everything is electrical. My head hurts. It's okay, Musky. Okay, so let's imagine that we have a square here and the light source is coming out from this side. So let's... Okay, so let's say we have a square. Not a white square. Let's imagine a darkish square. Okay. I'm using the shift tool, by the way. I'm not using Hocus Pocus. I'm just putting my finger on the shift tool and moving it. Gives me straight lines. Alright, so then we get a light source that's coming out of this side. Actually, let's imagine it's like a sunlight. Okay. So the sun is shining light rays. These light rays, as you have learned from grade 3, shine directly out of the sun as if the sun is a vanishing point of light rays. And all the light grows intensely the more closer you get to the light. Alright, so knowing that the closer something is to the light, the more light it has, the further something is to the light, the darker it is. So now we have to create a side that is darkest. Right over here. So let's imagine that, and let's give it some sort of 3D structure. And then we have all of this. So there's going to be a side here that is lightest. So which side would be lightest? So let's imagine the light source, the light that comes off lines. Clearly it's turned into a class about light sources and all that. I'm sorry. But I think you guys get it with the head thing. So this part here, not only do the light rays, vanishing points, tell us where things are lightest, but they tell us how to create shadows. But first, in order to create a shadow, you have to know which parts are not creating the shadow. You're going to have to know which parts of this object are agreeing to the laws of the light and versus the ones that are rebelling. So the side that's the darkest, which is the side that is the darkest? This side, right? This side is rebelling against the light. It says, no, I shall not accept your laws. And so what it does, it casts the shadow. This part is responsible for the shadow. Why? Because not only does it have the shadow on it, but it has the shadow forming. So what we have here is a vanishing point, let's say. Let's act like we have vanishing points. Alright? And then we have this part, and then this part. So out of these areas, we're going to have shadow. See, this is the difficult part right here. And then we have to have some sort of ground, some sort of horizon line, and then find where that shadow is being cast. Out until this side. And that looks pretty scientifically accurate because the light rays are moving from such a far area, the shadow is going to be a far area. It's going to cover an expansive space. So remember that the sides that are casting the shadow are, so let's try to create this edge here. Sometimes you have an organic shadow for a non-organic edge. So this shadow here, this edge here is going to cast this kind of edge. And then we're going to have this kind of edge until we have something that looks like this. Okay? Get ad block, you guys. And then the closer an object is, remember, to the subject, the darker the shadow. The further away from the light source, the more hazy the shadow, because the shadow sort of loses focus. They are also softer the further. Yes, exactly. Softer. Further away. Okay, so did you guys see how I created that shadow? But I could have eyeballed this shadow just as much. This shadow, I could have eyeballed it just as much. For a nose, you're going to have to eyeball it. But you're going to have to know that there are lines. So acting like, and we talked about this when we did landscapes back in September, not September, October, we acted as if light, the sun has vanishing points coming out of it. And that the center, the focus is the sun, focus of light. So we have two forms of perspective. Perspectives on the horizon line, the vanishing points on either side, and then we have the light source as the vanishing point for light specifically. Any questions? So does the value of the shadow and the value of the object it casts from the dark side have different values depending on what color they are actually? Yes, Mattia. When we have skin and light shines through skin, the skin color changes because the underlying color of skin is transparent, and we have blood. So what we see is, you know how when you see an ear, someone's ear, when you see a kitten's ear, you have the basic pink of the ear, but then you have the light shining through it. Let's say it's a yellowish light. Let's make it more cat-like, okay? And then we have the yellow of the light source. Here, what we're going to get is a change of color on the ear, not only because of the light, but because of the blood shining through. I like the effect because that's sort of created by that's what happens in biologically speaking. And when you have a subject like the square, like let's say this square that we drew was blue, the shadow it casts on that side will have a less saturated blue, and the shadow on the ground here, if the object, Mattia, is transparent. If the object is transparent, it's going to cast a blue. So let's say it's a black lens. But if the object is opaque, the shadow of on the ground is going to be a dark color of whatever the color of the ground is. So let's say it's a green. The shadow will be a dark green. It will not be a dark blue, because the shadow is found on a green surface. Okay, so let's make that. These colors are horrendous. So as you can see, this is a dark green versus it will not have it. However, it will change color if the light source, and as you know, is a yellow light source. So not only will we have yellow in the grass, but what's the opposite of yellow on the color wheel? A cool bluish purple. That will act as a universal tackle. So do you see how much more realistic the shadow is? Just a couple of strokes and you already have a realistic looking compared to before, which was dark green. Now it's dark green and purple. Do you see that? Okay, so that's basically what Mattia was asking about. Okay, so the blue of the square doesn't change, doesn't cast a blue shadow. If it's transparent, if it's like a see-through paper that's blue, it's going to reflect some blue in it, because what happens, it stands in the way. Well, I just turned British for a second. It stands in the way of the light. So imagine light source, yellowish. Don't laugh at my sudden British accent. As much as I wish I had one, I do not. Okay. Sometimes though, my brain is like, oh, I wish I had it. Let's just do one. Let's just do something that's British and accentish. Okay, so let's say this is the transparent paper that we've put up against the sun. Okay, the sun is going to shine through. We're going to have light shining through this purple object. When the light goes through, why did I say Estonian? Why did I say that it has to be transparent? Because the light has to go through it. But when the light goes through it, light has been interrupted, but it's been halfway interrupted. So what happens to the light color? What happens to the color of the light? Yeah, sunspots. I wish they were that nice. They're the most evil things in the world, those sunspots. Like a colored lens, it changes the color of the light. Okay, but not completely into a purple. It's going to just change it into a mix. Alright, so that's what you mean when you said, Mattia, if the shadow color changes. Okay? Sometimes, however, and this will happen, sometimes you get something like this. And I know you've seen it. You get the blue color, you get the nice shadow, but then you get this ring of blue around the shadow. Is this what you meant, Mattia? When you get the ring of blue around the shadow? Even though the shadow has all the purples and yellows in it that it's supposed to have, you get this like ring of blue that's the same color as the color of the... So this happens only because the light is reflecting so much that it's reflected the color back, and the color has reflected on the ground, but it's not reflected around it. It's first given it a glow. This glow is reflecting everywhere, but because it's dark in this area, it's sort of going to be more visible because of the shadow that's already there. Okay? So I guess today's class is going to be about head shapes as well as how to light and shade, basics of lighting and shading. Actually, I didn't know how dark the shadow should be compared to the darkest side of the cube. Usually it's going to cast a similar shadow, but it depends on the color underneath it. Depends on the color that's happening underneath. If the color underneath is a green or a really bright green, it's going to be... Wait, I have it here. If it's a really dark green, I really hate these colors right now. These are just ugly. Let me just desaturate. Okay, let's give it a dark side. And then let's give it a light side. Alright, this shadow here, most of the time, depending on the intensity of light, there is going to be a degree where the two shadows merge. But if the underlayer, let's say that you're on a yellow surface, the shadow isn't going to be that intense because the yellow is reflecting light. So you're going to have to think about how this yellow surface or the grass is reflecting the light. You're going to have to think about how it reflects light when it has it. Even if it's cast by a shadow, a little bit of light will start peeking through, which will make the shadow lighter. Even though the shadow is supposed to be darker, it's going to be lighter. Same thing with white. White places. But if you have a really dark surface, let's say it's like let's say it's a dark brown tabletop, and you have your teacup, you're going to have a really dark shadow. Yeah. That's what you're wondering. Sorry if I took forever to answer that. So many concepts. Okay, so this shadow is going to be extremely dark, even if the teacup is white. Doesn't matter. It's the fact that the teacup is not transparent. Doesn't matter if the teacup has diamonds on it. It's the fact that the teacup stands in the way of the light completely. So remember, it's not the color of the object, but how thick the object is when it's interrupting the light. Okay, now for some critiques. I hope today was helpful, and I'm not sure if I'll upload the critiques on the YouTube channel, but thank you guys for watching if you're watching on YouTube.